As an American, I apologize for Trump. But also, if you're overwhelmed with Trump, there's this fantastic plugin on Chrome, which is Make America Kittens Again, and it replaces every picture of Trump with kittens. All right? Helps me every day. Okay. Our next speaker is Dr. Vivianne Naimy. She is the professor of finance and the dean of Faculty of Business Administration and Economics at Notre Dame University, Lebanon. She has published articles in a number of professional and academic journals in the area of risk management and financial modeling. Come on up. Thank you very much.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening. I would like first to thank you for being here. I would like to thank the organizer of this beautiful seminar, Mr. Jihad Hakayem. Where are you, Jihad? I can't see you. He's always on the alert to follow with all the market moves and volatilities, and this is something I really admire in him. I thank also the sponsors of this event. I'm going to be a little bit serious since I'm an academician, and I will share with you the output of a paper I did with one of my MBA students called Ruba Caton. We tried to assess the impact of the oil price decline on the GCC banking system. So I'm going to start, can you hear me? Even I can without the microphone. I'm going to start with the background. So is this better? Yeah. You know, the plunge in oil prices in the second half of 2014 was practically one of the several episodes of significant oil price declines which occurred over the past 3 decades. While certain episodes were mainly driven by weakening global demand following the US recession in the 1990-91 and then in 2001, the Asian crisis in 1997-98 and the financial crisis of 2008-2009, the recent episode shares 2 key parallels with that of 85-86, as both episodes followed a period of, one, we had a rapid expansion in the supply of oil from non-OPEC countries, and an eventual shift in OPEC policy to forego price targeting and increase production. In time, the net impact of the recent oil price decline on the global economy has been ambiguous, really ambiguous. A wide range of macroeconomic and financial implications has been confronted by both oil importing and oil exporting countries. Accompanied by real income shifts from oil exporting countries to oil importing countries, the drop in oil price has relaxed government budget and raised growth in oil importing countries. So far we're still fine. While all exporting countries have faced fiscal pressures and contracted activity, which in turn have strained balance sheets of corporations and firms, and by raising non-performing loans, those of banks. Obviously, there exist regions and countries whose economies, and by extension their banking systems, are very sensitive to oil market volatility. A perfect example would be the Gulf Cooperation Council economies, which can be negatively affected by oil prices. What is the purpose of the study? Basically, as I told you, given the sensitivity of the GCC economies and banking sectors to any oil price movement, This study attempts to determine the impact of the recent oil price decline on the GCC banking system through examining diverse bank performance indicators, how they responded to the latest oil price decline. Why the study? It highlights the originality of the study and its added value as it investigates the impact of the recent oil decline on the GCC banking system. In fact, many studies, they have assessed the impact of oil price movement on the economy. However, none of them, to my knowledge, have really assessed in a scientific matter their impact on the banking system. Also, the need for the study is manifested in its significance to measure the resilience, and this is, I believe, something extremely important, the resilience of the GCC banking system to absorb sudden oil price shocks, and more specifically, the recent oil price slump. This study will provide the GCC bank authorities, hopefully, with incentives to strengthen those indicators and try to grant them with more attention as they contribute to the overall performance of the GCC banking system. We're not pretentious here, we're just scientific. And recommend the needed changes and the preventive actions to better deal with possible oil shocks and dampen the impact of future oil price movements on the GCC economies. I will not go through the review of literature. However, the purpose of the review of literature is to show you that really we have no scientific study that really assessed the impact of the oil price decline on the GCC banking system. So I will go through the review of literature. In case you are interested, of course, the presentation will be available for you. And I will tackle immediately the methodology and the sample, how we did the study. I used the Chow test, which is an econometric model that has been commonly used to test for structural change. It means if we have a regression and we have many data, in case we have structural change, we are unable to draw this regression. So we have a certain structural change that is detected by the Chow test. The model is applied to test, as I told you, for structural breaks and trend changes in the overall performance on the GCC banks upon the occurrence of the 2014 oil price shock. And I will show you the graph why I chose the 2014. And the study will cover the period 2011-2017. Unfortunately, the year 2018 is not included because of course, we don't have final data and final balance sheet for the whole banking system. We selected a sample of the GCC banks. I will talk about it shortly. And the ratios are extracted from Orbis Bank Focus, formerly known as the bank scope. And of course, we used the eViews. We have chosen Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. Why? Because 83.4% of the total GCC GDP is really represented by these three countries. They constitute 79% of the total GCC crude oil production. And then they export, I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar, 82% of the total GCC crude oil exports. And finally, they possess about 79% of the total GCC crude oil proved reserves. So that's why we consider that tackling these three countries is really enough. For comparison purposes, we apply the Chow test for each country, for each of the banking sector alone. We have selected the sample banks from the total population banks provided, as I told you, by Bank Scope. And the period, again, is from 2011 up to 2017. And this is the sample of banks. As you see, for Qatar, out of 17 existing banks, we covered 14. And those 14 banks represent approximately 89% of the total banking system in terms of total assets. Unfortunately, we were unable to cover the whole sample because of the lack of data. For the UAE, out of 44, we took 32, which is representative in terms of total assets again, up to 98%. And for Saudi Arabia, out of 21 banks, we covered 13, which is approximately 50.7%. Basically, the largest bank, Saudi Arabian Monetary Agency, we excluded this bank because of the lack of data, unfortunately. And some other banks have been also excluded because we were not able to cover all the data for the studied period 2011-2017. The selected variables and the periods, the ratios are selected from a diversified category and are tested individually for any trend change in their performance, of course, which makes it possible to determine what bank ratios or aspects have been affected negatively in response to the recent oil price decline. The categories to which the selected ratios belong are the profitability, of course, they are the most important ones, the liquidity, the credit quality, and the capitalization ratios that involves, of course, everything related to the Cook ratio and to Basel 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. As you see, these are the ratios. Under profitability, we have the return on average assets, return on average equity, cost to income. So as you see, what we did, we collected for each ratio and for each bank all these figures from 2011 up to 2017. And the main purpose is to see whether these ratios or these countries, yes? 4 minutes, okay, I'm done. They have witnessed a structural change. As you see here, can you see the pointer? The pointer is not working. I chose the 2014 year as the year to be tested. Yani we need to test the structural change while inputting the 2014, because as you see, the period covers 2 stages through which oil prices behave differently. From 2011 up to 2014, it is approximately stable. And then during the year 2014-2015, we witnessed this drastic decrease, and then it stabilized. Now, I'm not covering again the year 2018, unfortunately, because of the lack of data. Well, something else very important to be scientific. We did this while using a weighted average method based on the size of total assets of each sample bank presenting a value for each tested ratio. It means each ratio has been weighted according to the total assets that this bank, this specific bank, represents to the total assets of the total banking system in that country. And this is the formula. Well, these are the ratios for each country. This is for Saudi banks, the profitability, liquidity, credit quality, and these are averages, weighted averages, as you see. Profitability, liquidity, and credit for the UAE banks again, and for Qatar banks. The Chow model, I will not explain the technicalities of the Chow test. However, as I told you, this is an econometric model, easy to be used, and it is very accurate. By the way, we used a significance level of 10%. And, well, the test is performed for each financial ratio of the country sample banks, from the pre-shock period to the post-shock one. And for each tested ratio, the corresponding F statistic and the p-value has been also calculated. And these are the values. These are the values, as you see, for Saudi banks, UAE banks, and Qatar banks. As you see here, whenever you have a p-value less than 10%, we are rejecting the H0 hypothesis. It means, in other words, in an easy word, they witnessed a structural change. So basically, as you see, some ratios in Saudi Arabia, they witnessed a structural change. Their liquidity, it was robust. The credit quality have been affected. And this is a summary of our findings. One, on the profitability level, UAE banks have experienced a structural break in the performance of most of their profitability ratios. Concerning liquidity, the three GCC banking sectors reveal strong liquidity positions, and this is something positive in my opinion, as neither liquidity ratio has experienced any structural break across the GCC countries. On the other hand, both Saudi and UAE banks, they have been affected on the credit quality level, as their credit quality ratios have experienced structural breaks and trend changes upon the 2014 oil price shock. Finally, the capitalization ratios of Saudi banks and only one capitalization ratio of the UAE banks have also experienced some structural breaks. Conclusion, the GCC banks, and in particular the Saudi and UAE banks, have been found to be a bit fragile at the credit level. However, they revealed resilience in terms of liquidity. This observation should motivate, of course, authorities to review their credit portfolios and ensure that loans are granted in a diversified fashion. Besides the strong liquidity and capital position they have witnessed, the capital positions have constituted the buffers which help the GCC banks stand resilience against the shock. So they have a very strong amortizer. This implies that the GCC banks should continue to build liquidity and capital buffers in the good times, especially in the times of high oil prices, for these buffers could act against any negative oil price shock in the future. Thank you very much.